Today at 6, a warning from Brussels after talks with the EU over post-Brexit trade in Northern Ireland end without agreement. Ministers want an end to border checks on goods going to Northern Ireland from the rest of the UK. But that's what you signed up to, says the EU.
The EU will not be shy in reacting swiftly, firmly and resolutely to ensure that the UK abides by its international law obligations.
In the last hour, Boris Johnson says he's optimistic a deal can be done. Also tonight, the Cornish village that's used to welcoming tourists. Now it's host to the world's top leaders and thousands of police officers. The latest official figures show 8 out of 10 people have COVID antibodies. So what does that mean for a final lifting of restrictions? The sisters killed in a Wembley park. A teenager goes on trial for murder. The court hears about his plan to sacrifice women for a lottery win. A row between the Sussexes and a Buckingham Palace source over the naming of their new baby daughter. Now a warning from Harry and Meghan's lawyers.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, we'll be live inside the England camp as the controversy around the England players taking the knee continues.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. The EU has doubled down on its threat to take action against the UK after talks about the implementation of post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland ended without a breakthrough today. At the heart of the row is the Brexit agreement's Northern Ireland Protocol, which allows for border checks on goods going into the province from the rest of the UK. Ministers want an end to those checks, arguing they are leading to food shortages. The European Commission's Vice President, Maros Sefcovic, warned that the EU is ready to take what he called resolute action if the UK failed to meet its obligations. In the last hour, Boris Johnson insisted a deal was still doable. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, reports.
A short, powerful slogan, but getting Brexit done isn't as easy as it sounds. After years of painstaking negotiations, we left the EU with a deal. Now the whole thing could be unravelling over those new rules on trade in Northern Ireland. The EU's chief negotiator was back in London for more talks with the UK's Brexit minister, and it didn't go well.
We are at the crossroads in our relationship with the UK. The EU will not be shy in reacting swiftly, firmly and resolutely to ensure that the UK abides by its international law obligations.
There weren't any breakthroughs, there aren't any breakdowns either, and we're going to carry on talking. What we really now need to do is very urgently find some solutions.
The most severe Brexit disruption is being felt in Northern Ireland, which still follows EU rules. England, Scotland and Wales don't, so the way goods move within the UK has changed. For example, the EU doesn't accept chilled meats from other countries, so British sausages won't be allowed in Belfast supermarkets from the end of this month. Certain things like milk, eggs, medicine and parcels need to be monitored when they arrive in Northern Ireland from Great Britain to make sure they meet EU standards. That's because Northern Ireland shares an open land border with an EU member, Ireland, and the EU doesn't want unchecked products finding their way into its single market area. This row's been brewing since the UK decided without agreement to delay some of these checks.
You've already launched legal action. How soon would you consider starting the next step?
I was coming here with a hope for a breakthrough. Of course, now we have to consider our future steps. It's not too late. Let's correct the path. Let's focus on what unites us.
There were plenty of people warning Boris Johnson at the time that the deal he was signing up to would mean exactly this: more checks and restrictions on goods crossing the Irish border. But ministers now sound irritated and surprised that the EU expects the UK to stick to the rules it agreed to. If that doesn't happen, there won't just be legal action, the EU could retaliate with taxes on British exports. Boris Johnson's in Cornwall preparing for the G7 summit of world leaders. He says the Brexit deal is about the careful balance of relationships.
What we want to do is make sure that we can have a solution that guarantees the peace process, and protects the peace process, but also guarantees the economic and territorial integrity of the whole United Kingdom.
The Prime Minister faces some uncomfortable chats beside the sea as the practical realities of Brexit become clearer. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, that trade row comes on the eve of the G7 summit of elected world leaders in Cornwall. Joe Biden is on his way and his team has already made it clear that the president's concerns over Northern Ireland run deep. Our North America editor John Sopel reports on America's changing role in the world under its new president.
Joe Biden's America is Back European tour nearly floored by an invasion of cicadas in Washington.
Watch out for the cicadas. I just got one from the got me.
The plane carrying the press was delayed because there were so many in the engines. The president wants his first foreign trip to be seen as a decisive break from the Trump years. No longer isolationist, America back in a role of global leadership. A point underlined by the president's national security advisor speaking exclusively to the BBC.
When we show up in Cornwall, we will be there to help lead the G7 in ending the pandemic. We will be there with incredible domestic growth to help power a global economic recovery. I think we will be showing through our deeds that the United States is capable right now, today, of actually delivering bold and decisive action.
The vexatious issue of Northern Ireland is one domestic policy area where Joe Biden can be expected to weigh in. The US has been watching with some unease British attempts to amend or renegotiate the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Whatever way they find to proceed must, at its core, fundamentally protect the gains of the Good Friday Agreement and not imperil that. And that is the message that President Biden will send when he's in Cornwall.
And if he had any indication that it would imperil the Good Friday Agreement, would that jeopardize a future US-UK trade deal?
I don't want to sit here today and negotiate in public around linkage or make some claim or threat. I would just say that our concern runs very deep on the Northern Ireland issue.
It had been widely touted that a 15-month-old travel ban on Britons and Europeans entering the US would be scrapped by President Biden at the G7 summit. But that is clearly not going to happen anytime soon.
When are we going to find out about the reopening of the borders to allow people from the UK to travel into the US?
I can't give you a time frame on it, I'm afraid. I have to defer to the objective evidence-based process, and those of us at the White House don't dictate that process, don't shape that process, because it's left in the hands of the professionals.
As final preparations are made in Cornwall, there'll be relief among G7 leaders to see a more familiar style of American president. Less isolationist, more supportive of international bodies, less capricious. But there's unease too about how reliable a partner the US will be in the long term. John Sopel, BBC News.
The small seaside village of Carbis Bay has never seen anything like it. As global leaders and their teams of diplomats fly into Cornwall, thousands of police officers have been drafted in to ensure security. What's the reaction from residents? Well, John Kay has been talking to some of them.
Cornwall. You know, that laid-back corner of the country where nothing much happens. St Ives doesn't have a police station, but there are now 6,000 officers here from across the UK.
They look like they're well prepared and we're putting our lives in their hands.
From tomorrow, there will be less of a holiday vibe here. The two hotels where global leaders will discuss things like the pandemic and the environment are sealed off.
Some consider it a waste of money when we've got children going hungry.
Charles now looks out on a ring of steel.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, this is a quiet residential area with a school at the top, you know. A little bit unusual, you know.
What do you make of all this? Well, it's just going to be so different, isn't it?
We're moving out of home for the weekend. We're moving away.
Cornwall's airborne predators now have some serious competition. There's a radar unit in the National Trust car park, and the fishing boats have company.
They just told me I couldn't go inside a certain area.
When this fisherman tried to reach his lobster pots this morning, he was turned back by a warship.
Were you not given warning about this? You didn't
None
know?
at all. No warning, nothing. We presumed the Navy would be coming for a bit of protection. I fully understand that they do need to do that, but they should have really given us a heads up.
But some are benefiting. These sisters are providing hampers of Cornish products for the VIPs.
For us, the prospect of one of our items ending up in somewhere like the White House is actually mind-blowing, and we can't quite get our head around it. You know, we're in a small shop in St Ives, so for us, this is kind of the biggest thing that could happen for us.
Spencer just wants to know how he's going to get his car out. He's turned up from Scotland on holiday, expecting a sea view, not a summit.
We didn't know till we arrived.
What? You didn't know it was happening?
No.
What do you make of it? Some do worry about COVID and protests. But next door to the summit, there is pride that Cornwall's big moment is here. John Kay, BBC News, Carbis Bay.
And we can talk to our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, who is in Carbis Bay for us this evening. Laura, I guess it's a big moment for Boris Johnson, but also for post-Brexit Britain.
Yes, no question about it, George. This is a big, serious diplomatic get-together after an extraordinary year for democracies across the world. And it's a huge opportunity for Boris Johnson, therefore, who wants to be seen as the host with the most. And the opportunity for him is particularly important in two areas for Downing Street. One, firstly, the opportunity to show that after the turbulence of the Trump years, that the relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States is reaffirmed, is stronger than ever. And he hopes, even though he'll be meeting President Biden in person for the very first time, that the two men will show when they meet tomorrow that they can get business done and that the relationship between the two countries is strong and secure. But Boris Johnson also wants to show that after the stresses and strains of the pandemics, that the world's big democracies working together can achieve more than they can do apart. And whether that's on climate change, whether it's on vaccines, there are all sorts of areas where Downing Street hopes the countries getting together can really show that they can get things done rather than just have a kind of talking shop. But as ever, when there is a big opportunity, that comes with a big risk too. And at any get-together like this, there's always the kind of risk of diplomatic spits or spats overshadowing things. Now, Number 10 just will not want that to happen at all, whether on Brexit, Northern Ireland or anything else. But there is the potential of a clash of the two visions of the impact on Britain leaving the EU is still something that Boris Johnson is going to have to deal with in the next few days. Feels a little bit squally here tonight. Downing Street would hope that metaphorically as well as in reality that the sun might come out before too long.
All right, Laura, thank you. The latest official figures on the pandemic show that in the past 24 hours, 6 deaths were reported and there have been 7,540 new infections, which means an average of 5,984 new cases per day in the last week. Nearly 137,000 people received a first dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, meaning more than 40.7 million people have now had their first jab. That's over 77% of the UK adults. The number of people who've had their second dose of the vaccine in the latest 24-hour period is over 313,000. More than 28.5 million have had both doses, meaning over 54% of UK adults are now fully vaccinated. New official figures show that 8 in 10 adults in the UK now have antibodies for the coronavirus, meaning they have some level of immunity to the virus. But experts are still concerned, pointing to rising case numbers, especially in northwest England, with the Delta variant that was first identified in India. Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports from Manchester.
This is what we're likely to see in hotspot areas of Greater Manchester and Lancashire in the coming weeks. In Bolton, a big push on testing but also vaccinations has succeeded in cutting the infection rate by around a quarter in just 10 days. The plan is to replicate that success across the region. Here in Stockport, in the south of Greater Manchester, the infection rate has grown by 150% in just a week. Now that's obviously meant some school children have been sent home, even some businesses have had to close as staff self-isolate. But the really serious impact will be if those infections translate into hospitalisations. If people fall so ill, they end up being admitted. So far, at least, health leaders in Greater Manchester say the vaccines are keeping the most vulnerable out of hospital.
It is now predominantly younger people who've not had access to vaccines. They're not getting seriously ill and they're not, in general, ending up in intensive care.
Because it's generally unvaccinated younger people falling ill with the virus, there have been calls for surge vaccinations in areas seeing a spike in infections. But the supply of Pfizer and Moderna, the vaccines used for the under 40s, is limited. So surging in one region may not be possible without causing shortages in another. The good news is that around 8 in 10 adults in the UK now have coronavirus antibodies through vaccination or past infection. The figures are 83% for adults in Wales, 80% in both England and Northern Ireland, and slightly lower, 73% in Scotland. But there are still many unknowns, with fresh warnings the Delta variant, now dominant in the UK, could be 60% more transmissible than the Alpha or Kent variant.
We're not out of the woods yet. I think we really need to prioritise getting more vaccines into more people, so that we can deal not only with this variant but with the risks of opening up and continue to move forward and not take a step back.
And all of this will play into the government's decision on whether we open up on June the 21st. That will have a real impact on lives and livelihoods for those like Doug Almond, who just wants to see his small chain of family-run pubs in Stockport running at full capacity.
It's the first thing you think about when you're waking up. Are we going back to full strength or not? It really is. If they've got to put the decision back, we understand. But what we really don't want is the ambiguity where stop and start, stop and start.
Getting life back to normal while keeping us all safe. This is a decision that is in the balance. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Stockport.
And our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, joins me now. Following up on Dominic's report, Fergus, what does all this mean for that target date for lifting COVID restrictions finally?
Well, George, the government says it will be driven by the data, but the data has got a lot more complex in recent weeks because of the rise of the Delta variant. And there is huge uncertainty from those mapping the outbreak about where cases and hospital numbers may be heading. Professor Neil Ferguson, one of the key modellers from Imperial College London, has said the Delta variant could be between 40 and 80% more transmissible than the Alpha or Kent variant. And he thinks there's a risk of a substantial third wave, although how big is very unclear. At the moment, we've got around 1,000 COVID patients in hospital. Compare that with January when we had nearly 40,000. We know the vaccine, 2 doses, gives very strong protection, and very few people being admitted to hospital have been double jabbed. But the question is, will that wall of immunity hold if we get a really serious rise in cases? A delay of a couple of weeks in lifting final restrictions would allow millions more to be double jabbed, but at a cost to the economy and to personal liberty. Some big decisions to be made on Monday.
All right, Fergus, thanks very much. And the time is 18 minutes past 6, our top story this evening. A warning from Brussels after talks with the EU over post-Brexit trade in Northern Ireland end without agreement. And still to come, the countdown is on to the Euros, with kick-off in just 48 hours, with England and Wales playing at the weekend, Scotland on Monday.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, ahead of England's second test against New Zealand tomorrow, Captain Joe Root says his players have faced up to some ugly truths after a number of offensive historical tweets were revealed.
Now, one thing we've learned through the COVID pandemic is that young people have suffered most from the disruption it's caused. Not just here, but around the world. New figures show that globally, 1 in 6 under 25s were unemployed at the end of 2020. That's double the rate for those over 25. In addition, 1 billion young people have missed out on education and training. Darshini David starts her report in Crawley in West Sussex and those affected by the shutdown in the travel industry.
What's missing from the skies above Crawley are planes from neighbouring Gatwick. On the ground, that's meant thousands of job losses, blowing careers off course.
I started an apprenticeship for business admin level 2. Due to COVID, a month later, my contract was terminated. In July, I just thought I'm going to get made redundant anyway, because that's when they said that they were just making redundancies. So I went looking for a job myself. I was fortunate enough to obviously have been made redundant, but then found something almost straight away, so I'm very thankful for that.
They're completing business admin apprenticeships, but face uncertainty over what's next. Unemployment has tripled in Crawley.
We've still got some pain to come with the unwinding of the furlough scheme. It is going to affect more young people. There will be more young people, sadly, falling out of employment over the next 6 months or so.
Youth unemployment has risen particularly sharply in Crawley. Across the country, 1 in 7 young people are now out of a job. It's even worse in some popular summer spots. Cadiz in southern Spain should be a 3-hour hop from Gatwick, but there's currently no direct flights. The blow to tourism comes as the shipbuilding and aviation industries also struggle. Engineering graduate Carmen is finishing an apprenticeship in naval architecture, but she may not even secure bar work.
Here in Cadiz, most of my friends are really frustrated. The only jobs that they are required for are internships. So most of them are angry and frustrated because they have been working already, they have a bit of experience, and they are still required to be paid less.
Globally, over 1 billion under-25s have had their education, employment or training interrupted. But the battle so far has prioritised protecting the physical health of the elderly and vulnerable.
The brunt of this is being borne by young people to some extent, because they are the ones who need those early opportunities. So it's in the interest of not widening inequality in society as a whole that more of an effort is made.
What are the risks if those who can make a difference, policymakers, businesses, ignore that kind of advice?
We're throwing away the potential of 1.8 billion young people.
These women hope their work will pay off, but disruption at the start of careers can blight fortunes for decades to come. And there's no silver bullet. Darshini David, BBC News.
There's a different version of events tonight between a Buckingham Palace source and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex over the naming of their new daughter Lilibet. It comes after a palace source told the BBC that the Queen was never asked by Prince Harry and Meghan for permission to use her childhood nickname. And in the latest development, the Sussexes have issued a legal warning to some reporters covering the story. Well, our royal correspondent Johnny Diamond is with us. Two sides, two very different versions, Johnny.
Two very different versions, George, and both of them centring around this issue of the naming of the newborn Lilibet. That's a nickname that was given to the Queen by her grandfather, George V. It was used really by her closest relatives, so it's a very personal name. After Harry and Meghan made the announcement that they were going to call their little girl Lilibet, stories began to be published, sourced to Prince Harry's friends, that the couple had been given permission to use the name by the Queen. Oh no, she didn't. A palace source told the BBC. She was never asked for permission. The Sussexes shot back. The spokeswoman said that Harry had spoken early to the Queen, had raised the issue of Lilibet, and that if the Queen had not been supportive, the couple would not have used the name. Meanwhile, as you say, Harry and Meghan's lawyers have written to various different national news outlets, said that what the palace source told the BBC was defamatory and false, and that those outlets should not repeat the allegations at all.
All right, Johnny, thanks very much. The trial of the teenager accused of murdering two sisters in a London park has begun. 19-year-old Danielle Hussein is accused of stabbing Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry in June last year. The court heard how Hussein had made a pact with the devil, promising to sacrifice women in exchange for winning the lottery. He denies the murder charges. June Kelly has more.
Last weekend, Mina Smallman and her family had to face the first anniversary of the deaths of her two daughters. Today, they came to the Old Bailey to see a teenager go on trial accused of killing them both. Biba Henry on the left, died within hours of celebrating her 46th birthday outside in a park during lockdown. Her younger sister, Nicole Smallman, who was 27, was murdered beside her. Their bodies were discovered with their limbs intertwined at Friant Country Park in Wembley in North London. In the dock is 19-year-old Daniel Hussein. He denies the double murder. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow QC told the jury he'd made a written pact with the devil, signed in his own blood. It said he would perform a minimum of 6 sacrifices every 6 months. Sacrifice only women. Build a temple for you to do everything that I have promised. For me, win the Mega Millions super jackpot.
The court heard that Daniel Hussein's DNA was found on both women's bodies and on a blood-stained knife close by. Biba Henry had been stabbed 8 times. Nicole Smallman had suffered 28 stab wounds, and it appeared she had tried to fight off the attacker. June Kelly, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
The High Court has ruled that the government acted unlawfully at the start of the pandemic last year when it awarded a market research contract to a firm run by former colleagues of Dominic Cummings, the Prime Minister's chief advisor at the time. The judge said that the government's failure to consider other companies would lead other observers to think that bias had played a part in the decision. Ministers deny any favouritism. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning is live outside the High Court for us now. Lucy.
Well, is this a case of contracts for mates, as Labour claims, or just as Cabinet sources suggest, paperwork not being done during a COVID crisis? What is clear is the High Court has decided the government acted unlawfully when it gave this £500,000 contract to Public First. It does marketing research. It was run by friends of Dominic Cummings, people who had also worked with Michael Gove. Cabinet Office says Michael Gove wasn't involved in the decision, but his name was on the legal papers. And the judge deciding there was apparent bias because they didn't consider other firms. And that is embarrassing for the government. The case brought by the campaign group, the Good Law Project. But Dominic Cummings has been tweeting about this today, and he seems to suggest that this judgment means that he should have been concentrating on paperwork rather than the COVID crisis. Public First says it's proud of its work that it did, and the Cabinet Office says there was no actual bias and procedures have been tightened up, but a loss in court for the government today.
Lucy, thank you very much. There's now just 48 hours to go before the Euros gets underway, with Wales and England playing at the weekend and Scotland in action on Monday. The month-long tournament will see 24 teams take part in 51 games in 11 cities across Europe. As ever, hopes are high that England, with home advantage, will do well, despite the recent distractions around the squad taking the knee. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
It's a tournament that's given football some of its most unforgettable moments. The Euros may have been delayed by a year, but finally they're about to begin. And one man who scored in 2 consecutive European Championships can't wait.
We all look forward to a summer of a major tournament. And this, we've been made to wait quite a while for this one, so we're all excited.
24 teams will compete for European football's greatest prize. Wales are in Group A, while England and Scotland are grouped together and will meet next week. For the first time, the tournament's been spread across the continent with 11 host cities. Wembley will host 8 matches, including the semi-final and final. But COVID remains the #1 concern. Preparations for Spain's opener against Sweden already in chaos, with players from both teams testing positive and forced to isolate.
The biggest concern for me is that we do not have a team which needs to go on quarantine. We had always some challenges in each of the Euros, but this time the biggest challenge was that we could not really control the pandemic.
Is there any risk this could become a super spreader event?
In our view, not. We are confident what we have put in place.
For supporters, venues have different capacities and a range of rules. At Hampden Park in Glasgow, ticket holders will simply be asked to maintain social distancing of 1.5 metres. But here at Wembley, the 22,000 attending each group game will need to show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. With thousands of fans attending matches at grounds like Wembley over the coming weeks, organisers will hope that the Euros proves a morale-boosting symbol of hope and a return to some kind of normality. But they'll also begin amid uncertainty around the impact the pandemic could still have on this tournament and the potential for division.
And there's the taking of the knee.
The FA desperate that there's no repeat of the booing that's marred recent matches when England continue their anti-racism gesture.
I think it's incredibly disappointing. Well, we're really clear on our position, Dan. We are 100% behind the players, and we believe that once fans really understand it's not a political gesture, there is absolutely no reason for them to boo. They should respect the players and they should get behind their team in the Euros.
And with some of the game's greatest stars on show, many now hope the tournament's remembered for its football and not the unprecedented challenges it undoubtedly faces. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Time for the weather now with Helen Willett. Hello.
Hi, George. Hello, good evening to you. Warm where we have the sunshine, 26 degrees today, but there is more cloud around. Quite a lot of misty, murky weather around the Irish Sea coasts, and some of this showery rain in the south could be quite sharp this evening as well. You can see the general trend is moving it eastwards. So overnight tonight, it will turn much cloudier. So whilst we had quite a cool morning under the starry skies first thing this morning, it will be quite muggy as well as quite murky. So temperatures no lower than about 14 or 15 in the towns and cities. So a bit of a grey start tomorrow, despite the fact that we've still got the high pressure, the Azores high ruling the roost. These weather fronts slightly more active are close by to the north and west, with slightly more isobars around. There'll be more breeze as well. Just blowing that rain in across the northern and western Isles. For most of us, it's just cloudier to start, but again, the sun's strong at this time of year, so it's likely to be a sunnier afternoon across Northern Ireland than we've seen today. Northern and eastern Scotland, much of England and Wales seeing the brightness and hazy sunshine coming through, helped to break up that cloud by that brisker wind tomorrow, particularly in the north and the east. Given there's a bit more cloud around, temperatures will be perhaps a degree or so down on today, but warm for all of us despite the sunshine, despite the breeze and despite a bit of cloud in the north and east. That weather front really weakens as it edges its way southwards on Friday. So a few sharp showers potentially tomorrow, a few showers on this system on Friday, but fresher air follows for the majority. Again, we hold on to the warmth and mugginess in the south and the east, but for most it's a fresher feel on Friday. Come Saturday, well, in fact, the weekend, that high pressure is re-establishing itself once again, pushing those weak weather fronts out the way and allowing more sunshine to come through and therefore the temperature rise. In fact, by the time we get to Sunday, George, we might be pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius.
Gosh. Helen, thank you. And it's time for the news where you are. Goodbye.